I repeat, there will be of in the next 12 hours. Disruption. I repeat, there will be intense rainfall of 50 millimeters.
Okay, we are ready to start. So apology for technological failure. We are going to move on. I want to take the opportunity to welcome each and every one of us for this event, a side event during COP25, 27. Feel welcome, and I also want to take the opportunity to thank able panelists that are already seated and ready that we start. So without much ado, we are going to start our event. And once again, welcome. Sorry. Okay, so today's event, we are looking at the role of early warning, anticipatory action, and effective communication for resilience. And we are going to discuss this with respect to the Greater Horn of Africa or Eastern Africa region. We want to see how these three interconnected events takes place in the region. So I want to once again say thank you for coming. And this event will basically explore what early warning, anticipatory actions, and effective communication for resilience and adaptation look like, as I said, with focus to Eastern Africa region. We also want to look at how decision makers at various levels, including communities who are the end users, can be engaged in the production of climate services and disaster risk management. The discussion will further showcase the importance of developing early warning systems to enable audience to think critically about how to co-produce robust warnings and anticipatory actions that respond to people's needs. It will also further try to seek to overcome barriers that normally arise when the early warning is communicated to end users. And lastly, it will further explore what looks like in practice and on the ground and for the affected community. So the organizers of this event, as you have seen probably on the posters, our ICPAC, IGAD Climate Prediction and Prediction Center, which is an IGAD specialized institution for early warning. We have the BBC Media Action, Met Office of UK. We have the Grantham Institute of Imperial College London, and we also are contributing partners like the NORCAP, the Kenya Meteorological Department. So I want to welcome once again online viewers, wherever you are viewing from. We are online through YouTube, and feel engaged, feel as worthy participants, and the time will come for Q&A. We will ask you also to join in asking questions and making the discussion live. Just to start us off, we have worthy panelists already seated. Far to my right, second from right, I have Dr. Ahmed Amdihun. Amdihun is a regional manager, a program manager for the disaster risk management at ICPAC, based in Nairobi, Kenya. He leads a team of experts and oversees operation of the regional IGAD multi-hazard situation room that is currently operational. Dr. Ahmed has a long span of record or experience on climate resilience and disaster risk reduction, environmental system modeling, and spatial planning and analysis. I remember before he joined ICPAC, he served very well international organizations such as the UN Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and International Water Management Institute. So feel welcome, Dr. Ahmed, for this debate. Next to Ahmed, we have Dr. Caroline Wainwright. Okay, welcome, Caroline. Just show by your hands. Okay, we have Wainwright with us. Caroline is a research fellow at the Grantham Institute of Climate Change and Environment at Imperial College London. She researches on climate change-related risk for populations whose livelihoods are strongly dependent on seasonal rainfall, with a focus on rainfall seasonality over Africa. So, Caroline, feel welcome and be part of the discussion. The next panelist would be the Executive Director of NORCAP. We have with us here Benedicte Giæver, who is the Executive Director of NORCAP. She's have a long experience working with humanitarian, development, and peace-building sectors, and more than a decade of field experience from Africa and the Balkans. She has worked for various UN agencies, the Organizations for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and the International Federation of Red Cross. So Benedicte has a long experience in this field, and feel welcome to be part of the debate. The next panelist sitting next to me is Dr. Richard Jones from UK Met Office. Richard is a science fellow in the Met Office Hadley Center, working on regional climate information to inform adaptation and resilience with focus on developing countries. Since 2010, he has also been a visiting professor in the School of Geography and Environment of Oxford University, collaborating on attribution of climate events and African climate. He has been a lead author on several IPCC report chapters and is a coordinating lead author of Atlas chapter and the online interactive Atlas of the Working Group 1, contributing to the IPCC 6th Assessment Report. So welcome, Richard Jones. My fourth speaker today would be Joyce Kimutai of Kenya Met. Karibu, Joyce. Joyce is a climate scientist with the Kenya Meteorological Department, Nairobi, Kenya. Her research has increasingly focused on analyzing climate extremes and rising climate awareness among decision makers in the East Africa region. She participated in as one of the lead authors for IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land in the 6th Assessment Cycle. She is currently the alternate IPCC focal point for Kenya and negotiates for Kenya on agenda items under science, review, and systematic observation, loss and damage at the UNFCCC COP sessions. So thank you, Joyce, for being part of the discussion. The fifth speaker of today would be a senior broadcast minister with BBC Media Action, David Njuguna, right to the far end. Welcome, Njuguna. David is a Kenyan-based journalist and communication consultant who is a senior broadcast mentor with BBC Media Action. At the BBC International Charity as well. In his role, he trains and mentors journalists in producing audience-centered, impartial, trusted, and engaging health and climate-related programming. David has more than 13 years of experience working in the media and development in East Africa. So feel welcome, Ms. Njuguna, and feel part of the discussion. Sorry? Okay. So I'm told we are now able to get audio from Njuguna. Please go ahead.
This is an important weather announcement. Please pay attention to the following two messages. Announcement 1. There will be 50 millimeters of rainfall in your neighbourhood in the next 12 hours. I repeat, there will be 50 millimeters of rainfall in your neighbourhood in the next 12 hours.
All right, that was the weather information for this afternoon. We will play it again one more time so that you're prepared for what's going to happen this afternoon.
Announcement 2. There will be intense rainfall of 50 millimeters in your neighbourhood in the next 12 hours, with a high risk of flooding of properties and widespread travel disruption. I repeat, there will be intense rainfall of 50 millimeters in your neighbourhood in the next 12 hours, with a high risk of flooding of properties and widespread travel disruption.
Please play announcement 1 again, at least.
This is an important weather announcement. Please pay attention to the following two messages. Announcement 1. There will be 50 millimeters of rain in your neighbourhood in the next 12 hours. I repeat, there will be 50 millimeters of rainfall in your neighbourhood in the next 12 hours. Announcement 2. There will be intense rainfall of 50 millimeters in your neighbourhood in the next 12 hours, with a high risk of flooding of properties and widespread travel disruption. I repeat, there will be intense rainfall of 50 millimeters in your neighbourhood in the next 12 hours, with a high risk of flooding of properties and widespread travel disruption.
All right, thank you, weather announcement. I'll ask us to have a short activity. Stand up if you thought the first announcement was useful. All right? Stand up if you thought the information on the first announcement was useful. Any? It's not a trick question. I need, if you thought you got the right information from the first announcement, please stand up. All right? Now stand up if you think that the second announcement was more useful. All right? Yeah, you can stand up. Not by show of hand, you can stand up. Let me see. How many thought that the second announcement was more useful? All right, everyone thought the second announcement was more useful? All right, can I get 2 volunteers to say why, please? You can come on, just 2, a lady and a gentleman, please. At least I know the lady, I saw you shaking your head. Would you please come and share why you thought the second one was in? And then I'll volunteer a gentleman from the other side who had lifted his hand. The one in a gray shirt. Yes, okay, please. Thank you. Introduce yourself on this radio station and say why it was important.
Hi, Alicia Leonard from the University of Oxford and the University of Ottawa. It was more useful because it gave practical advice about the traffic conditions, you know, how it might affect people's lives. That's what I thought, yeah.
Thank you. And for the gentleman, was it useful for you and why? Oh, there is a microphone there for you.
Yeah, for me, it had an ample time to take some action a bit.
All right. Thank you, our radio listeners. Thank you for your feedback. I now welcome the next announcement from our next presenter, radio presenter. You're welcome.
So thank you very much, David, and thank you very much, our audience, for your very perceptive response to those 2 announcements. So we see forecasts describing impacts are easier to understand and take action on than traditional forecasts. And we know that with the increasing intensity and frequency of weather and climate hazards, it is even more important than ever before to protect lives and livelihoods from their impacts. So this session will explore early warnings and their effectiveness, and I would now like to hand over to Dr. Philip Omondi to continue this session. Dr. Omondi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jones. Now we get to the business now. Thanks for the toolkits. Now, I want to start the debate by getting to Dr. Ahmed. We know that climate services are very important along the value chain from the producers to end users. And again, as it is important, we are basically grappling with adaptation and resilience building for member countries, particularly in Eastern Africa. I want you to tell the audience why early warning system matters, especially in Eastern Africa region that we are all aware is highly impacted by extreme climatic events. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much, moderator. I have a few slides not to present, but just as visuals, but I would like to say it live from here. The Eastern Africa region, as we all know, is an epitome of climate crisis, as we have seen in our hazards after hazards turning into disasters, primarily not because we have so many hazards like the Asia region or so, but because there is, low coping capacity and high vulnerability to this climate crisis. The most important role of early warnings, I think you all know, is particularly it is a way of saving lives. It is one of the proven way of risk reduction. And of course, prevention of loss and damage. Before we come to talk about how to, pay for the loss and damage, prevention is the critical element. And early warnings are there particularly to provide this. My center, the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center, generate climate forecasts, which is quite important. We also do advisories every season or just before every season in that region. The most important thing now to understand, which I would like to reiterate to this audience, is early warning is not just an information that we generate and send over. I think we can refer to any of the literatures. There are 4 key components to the early warnings. Most of us are more focused on the information bit of it. But before that, it really requires a good understanding of the risk knowledge. Also a robust monitoring and forecasting system, which we are trying for the Horn of Africa through ICPAC. But also, it has to do again with response capabilities. That is, I think, where the Horn of Africa region is really struggling. With a tiny disturbance of the weather, let's say 1 season, 2 seasons failed, already we start counting millions in acute food insecurity. The last one, or the last component of the early warning is, again, to do with risk communication, which our colleagues from BBC Media will tell you later, reaching the last mile. These are critical elements. If we talk of early warnings, I think, or the role of early warnings, this is where we should be emphasizing and stressing. One thing which I would like to talk about from Eastern Africa is particularly the current drought, for example, which I would like to use as an example. If you can just proceed to the last slide. One more, yeah, here. This is a consecutive 4 or 5 seasons failed with very glare image, as you can see, very devastating. It's not only a color, actually. It is thousands of people displaced from their place of origin. Close to 10 million livestock perished. And of course, about 50 million people in acute food insecurity. This is very horrendous at multiple scales. So why or where did we get it wrong, or what really went wrong is maybe the point of my discussion, and I will hand over. The critical element of early warnings, as we said, is ICPAC has been issuing warnings after warnings. Almost every 3 months, we issue early warnings and advisories. So the most important part, or where we get it wrong, is we assume that sending batch emails to different stakeholders or publishing on the web guarantees action. But it didn't, for sure. Early warnings are particularly tainted in those 4 key components. If countries don't have the capacity to respond, then our warnings are as good as nothing. That's exactly what's happening. So when we call for climate justice or so, the element, the crux of the matter is we should make sure that the finance are available to member countries, to local communities, so that they be able to respond in time. There is debilitating incapacity, particularly of resources to member countries, to be able to avail resources in anticipation of a disaster. That's not the case. Even when the disasters or when the seasons are failing, one after the other, still resources are very scarce. So I think the crux of the early warnings is we should understand that there are adaptation measures, one of the finest adaptation measures. And there are also measures particularly to prevent loss and damage, which is critical. 100 million livestock heads lost to a drought disaster in the region is very staggering. It's really staggering. So that is where solidarity is needed. Technical, financial, research in the academia sector all need to really join hands to be able to make an end-to-end early warning with all its entirety. So that's not the end of the story, but the early action part is also another critical thing. I hope other panelists will talk about it, but that is exactly the story of the Horn of Africa with the devastating impacts due to the drought. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. We'll come back to you later. You have brought in a very important point that the fact that producers give early warning does not necessarily mean that the end users are going to use it. There is more to do other than that. Now, that now brings me to the second panelist. I want to ask Caroline Wainwright. You have been in this field, particularly researching on climate-related risk for population whose livelihoods are at stake. I want us to understand about the climate science, the focus and the projections. You know, focus is a short term, but projection many years to come or several time scale. And we know in terms of scale and uncertainties. Could you kindly give us some highlights on the scale and uncertainties that we have around forecasting and projections?
Can we get rid of the video in that corner? Do you know if we can get rid of the video in the corner? Okay. Cool. Yeah. So I'm going to be. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about when we're designing early warning systems. There are a few key questions we need to think about, and two of the many key questions we need to think about are: what are the questions that science can answer, and what do users need? And when we're thinking about designing early warning systems, it's important that we think about the interaction of these two things and where these cross over. So in terms of the questions that science can answer, can we forecast on the right timescales? What useful information can science provide? And is that the useful information that users need? What is it that they need to know? Are we producing useful forecasts of rainfall when they need useful forecasts of soil moisture? And so when we're designing early warning systems, it's really important that we have everybody around the table, that we have users and researchers talking about where these two topics interact. Because there are a number of challenges in this, a few of which I'll discuss now. So one of the challenges we have is scale. Forecasts and climate projections are often produced on large scales, and some of the graphics on this slide show the size of the grid boxes that we use when we produce climate projections and forecast information. And you can see that some of these grid boxes are quite large. They cover different topographies, different regions, different localities. They might blur out a lot of the spatial differences. But then when we turn to what users need, well, what do users need? Well, let's think of a user who's managing a hydrological dam. That user needs to know about rainfall and conditions over their catchment. Let's think about an agricultural farmer. The information they need might be for a single field, for their farm. That scale might be a lot smaller than the scale on which forecasts and climate projections are produced. So it's really important when we're designing early warning systems that we users and researchers work together to work out how to scale down that information, how to assess whether it's skillful and reliable at the scale that's relevant to users. Another challenge is the uncertainty. Both forecasts and climate projections have associated uncertainty. The skill of forecast, by which we mean how good is the forecast, varies on a number of timescales. A forecast for mid-December won't be as good as the forecast for next week. A forecast in one season might have different skill, different ability to a forecast in a different season. A forecast for East Africa might have different skill to a forecast for Southeast Africa. And all of these are challenges when we're designing early warning systems. When we're thinking about climate projections, there are also uncertainties. When we look at the future projections for East Africa from the CMIP6 models, while most of the models show an increase, some models show a decrease. And this also creates challenges. But let's then turn to what do the users need? Well, the users need reliable information. They need to know when to take a decision. They need to know when to take actions. And this is another challenge when we're designing early warning systems, where we need both researchers and users around the table designing these systems. So how have these challenges been overcome? So the High Crystal project aimed to provide users with decision-relevant climate information. But it did a lot of research around climate change over East Africa and looked at a lot of these uncertainties. So how did it overcome this when communicating this to users? Well, they came up with 3 possible futures, and these are shown at the top of the slide. One of the futures was for a much wetter future, one future was for a much drier future. And then they looked at different possible impacts in urban and rural settings and whether these impacts were likely to occur under these different futures, to show users that actually some impacts are likely whatever future we have. The uncertainty is important, that we see that things like drainage systems likely to be overwhelmed and harder to maintain, well, we might see that in a drier future or a wetter future. Alternatively, other impacts we might only see under a drier or a wetter future. And so this was how they overcame that issue of uncertainty to communicate to users. On a seasonal forecasting scale, recent work done within the GCRF African SWIFT project looked at how we can forecast for meningitis. So they did a lot of scientific research looking at the basis of what are the atmospheric drivers for meningitis cases, followed by what is the skill of these drivers. Can we forecast the temperature? Can we forecast the humidity and the wind speed and the dust? And they used this, working with health authorities, to produce forecasts for meningitis outbreaks, showing the likely risk level at different times through the season for meningitis outbreaks. So in short, it's really important that future research into early warning system is really driven by user needs, where we're researching what the users need, what the users are demanding, but equally that forecasts and early warning systems are based on a strong basis of scientific research. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Brilliant presentation. Thank you so much. You are saying in your presentation that users need reliable and actionable information. Very critical. And that brings us now to anticipatory action. And I want to say that NORCAP has invested heavily in the region, particularly in capacity. And I must say I'm one of the beneficiaries of NORCAP, first one in ICPAC, and Given was my boss. So kindly, can you give us more about anticipatory action, and then why it is important for early warning? Thank you, Givens.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And it's great to see you all here today, and also really so happy that so many of you could come here. Anticipatory action lies a little bit in the name. We're anticipating that something is going to happen, yeah. But traditionally speaking, especially within the humanitarian community, we have been reactive, yeah? So we have been waiting that an event or a hazard should happen, and then we start an assessment analysis, then we start fundraising, advocacy, etc. So now with the anticipatory action, we actually anticipate that something is going to happen, and it's based upon the information we're getting from our scientists, the climate scientists. So this is what has been crucial for us in our work in collaboration with organizations like ICPAC in terms of how can we strengthen this relationship? Because I think this is what it's all about now. I just listened in onto the previous panel discussions before ours started, and that's what they were asking about. And they were discussing what is happening on the Horn of Africa, and I thought to myself, guys, you should stay for this session, and we can tell you that actually really good measures are on its way. So I'll say a little bit more about that. Just briefly, since you mentioned NORCAP, I mean, what's special about NORCAP is that we don't have our own programs. We only work through and with other partners, and some of you are here today in the audience. So we collaborated last year with 50 different partners, from multinational organizations to regional organizations to national authorities, local authorities, and so civil society actors. So we are there because we think that standing together and working across gives a better outcome and impact in the end for those we are here to serve. I mean, I think most of you know why this is needed, so I don't really need to go through why we need accurate, timely, accessible, understandable climate information. But still, we see that we need to convince other actors that this is very much needed, and that they need to take that into their planning processes when they set up for programs and projects. In doing this, we have been working together with regional climate centers, the National Meteorological and Hydrological Offices, WMO, and the UN agencies. And this is where we have been working very systemically now over, I think, the last 3 to 5 years in terms of strength and capacity for predicting, forecasting, and delivering weather and climate forecasts, which feeds into early warning and action programs. And I'll give you an example. This is the screenshot of East Africa Hazard Watch that we, in close collaboration, we've been supporting ICPAC in terms of developing this. And I think several here on the podium are very familiar with this. So this is actually a very important tool that we still need to develop, and we will continue to work on this. But this tool can actually say us so much more, and it's also a tool that can be used by the national meteorological centers. It can be used by the national line ministries. It can also be used by the end users in the end of the day, if we continue to put more efforts into it. So I think we have got a good start. So far we have 11,000 users, but I just see this as the beginning of it. Also here we are discussing with WMO in terms of how we can take this tool forward to see how can we develop it for all of Africa. And I think, as I said, that we need to spend even more time on seeing how can this become a viable instrument for the Ministry of Health, for instance, in a given country, or the Ministry of Water, or Energy, or Transport, etc. But that takes time, and that's time that we and also the donors need to understand that they need to invest accordingly. And this is something that I've been missing in many of this discussion in COP, is that to achieve change, it takes time. And they also need to pay for that change to take place. It's not just about putting money into the action, but it's actually also putting money into achieving the change. And that's something we are missing. There's a diverse range of users, and that's something we need to understand more about. And that's a major challenge, that we often talk to a variety of users. So we need to understand who are these end users. And that's what a lot of our work when it comes to the communication has been focusing on. Because the end users, they're characterized by, cultural, religious, and linguistic differences, but also historical ways of reading the climate and reading the changes. So these are some of the key challenges that we need to interact with the local communities when we are trying to bring forward with the information that we have available to us. So we have some key challenges. Forecasts must be regular and reliable provided. I think that goes without saying. But when I come to reliable, we still know that there's a lot of fake news out there, to use a famous person's words. So we need to make sure, and that's something we've done through training of journalists, the media, for the East, the Horn of Africa, in order for them to make sure that, they need to be precise in what they're saying, but they also need to make sure where they get their information from. And this is something I think more work needs to go into, that we prevent unreliable information, because if not, the people, the end users, will not continue to listen to us. And it's interesting, we've been looking into, what sort of means of communication do they want. So we've done several surveys, both in the East and the West of Africa, and the majority says it's the radio. So I know every time I go to meetings, I will say, oh, what about the phone, what about the phone? But still, it's a radio that people really want. That's the primary one for ensuring information. And we did a study among rural communities in Uganda. It's a recent study. And they said that actually 90 respondents said that they'd seen an improvement, an increase in the amount of weather and climate information presented by local media over the last 3 seasons. So that's the result of the hard work that we all have been doing over the years. Forecasts must be easily accessed. Again, I mentioned the radio. Then it must be comprehensible. It mustn't be too technical. I think this has been one of the key reasons. And we just had an excellent example before we started in terms of that it needs to give a bit more information. And then it's language barriers, many people who don't need to write, etc. So we need to break down this. And there we've had some interesting collaboration together with partners in BBC Media Action and ICPAC in where we develop online training courses for journalists and the media to understand the technical terms in order to translate it into their own language. And we need to continue to do this. And we need to spread the excellent evidence we have of this and the trainings to the rest of the continent. Forecasts must be co-produced and co-owned. And maybe this is actually one of the most important points of the key challenges. So we worked a lot, and we will continue to work more on participatory planning. And that means actually that we bring together the end users together with the co-producers. And it's easier said than done, but we just have to continue to improve on this. And we all need to own this one. And here we also have an interesting project together with ICPAC and FAO, where we've been working on farmers. And we have some concrete projects so we can actually measure the results as we go ahead to see if it had anything, if we can see a concrete results following this. Equal access is crucial, but so is opportunity. And this is a key problem, because it's good to get the information, but if you can't act upon it, it becomes difficult, yeah? And this is also a worry from this conference. It's about how much of all the money that's now being pledged will reach the end users. And this is where, in terms of climate information and advice, we need to take account of the end user's situation, but we also need to understand, do they have the position to make a change in their lives? This is a picture of a lady in Uganda. She was informed through a participatory action that she should change the crop. So she changed from maize to beans, and she now ended up with 400 kilo of beans. So that was a good decision, but the thing we don't know, and that's the X factor, is what will the price be for her beans? So that's where, it's all interconnected, and that's where we just need to continue on these things so that we can actually try and predict what will the right recommendations be based upon facts. So this was just trying to be quick, some words from us in terms of our collaboration around anticipatory action. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Benedicte. Thank you. The very important points that an early warning center like ICPAC needs to look at must be credible early warning information, regularly, reliably provided, and most importantly, co-produced. And indeed, the experts that you provided to the center has really worked around this to make sure that the early warning is co-produced. So that brings me to my next panelist, Dr. Jones. As you take the microphone, all these that have been listed, sometimes, most of the times are provided, but you still find that people or the end users don't take this information and use it, including the governments. So kindly, can you tell us briefly, what are the key elements that can make an early warning work so that the people in the Eastern Africa region can adopt and make it workable? Because warning is given, action sometimes is wanting. But what is it that an early warning system is needed for it to work and ensure that people listen and take action? Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to present at this really interesting side event. So I'm going to start by talking about what an impact-based forecast is. So an impact-based forecast is generated because we observe that people will be affected by the impact of a hazard or combination of hazards. This forms the basis of actionable early warning services and triggers early or anticipatory action, which then becomes the trigger for early action or anticipatory responses to that impact-based forecast. Now, to develop the understanding of the effects of these hazards, of these hazard impacts, and then the actionable early warning services that we want to build to allow the communities, the people who are affected, to build resilience to them, it is essential that the network of users and producers of relevant information have regular, open and honest engagement. This builds trust and understanding and shared knowledge. So for this, we have to start with the application. We have to start with what is the issue on the ground, what is the burning issue, what is it that affects people. So we need everybody that's involved, from the people affected to the Met services and the scientists and the others who are developing and communicating the impact-based forecasts. We need all of these, who are producers and users information, to integrate the information knowledge that they have via a co-production process to formulate relevant policies and decisions and actions. So it's the integration of the knowledge of the users, the knowledge of the Met services, the scientists, the bringing of all of this together, the discussions, the interactions, the co-production, which allows us to come up with the actionable information, the impact-based forecast, and then the policies or the decisions, the actions, which allow the communities to build their resilience to those impacts. So I just want to finish my very brief intervention with an example, and this example comes from the WISER program. WISER is one of the UK WISER, Weather Information and Climate Services is the name of the program. It's one of the UK's foreign, common and development offices, many people-centred weather and climate services, and this is one which is specifically run by the Met Office. And very much has co-production at the heart of everything that we do within WISER. And the example I want to give is this project, the WISER Highway Project, which provides life-saving warnings of dangerous conditions on Lake Victoria. And a key element, and essentially the key to the success of this project, was working with the affected communities to develop effective either text message or color-coded messages or physical flag systems, which allowed the producers of the forecast to effectively communicate the warnings to the people who needed it, essentially the fishers who needed to avoid going out onto Lake Victoria when there was hazardous weather. So that's just a very brief example of the key that co-production plays in the development of effective early warning services and the impact-based forecasts which feed into those early warning services. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. So with that now brings us to applications. We know that the Kenya Met Department is an early warning center for Kenya. And we have one of the lead scientists that are really working hard on the early warning phase. Joyce Kimutai, I would want to ask you to just briefly give us how you apply all this that we have heard from the panelists. We have early warning, anticipatory, and issues to do with co-production of early warning information. So I know you work with so many communities in the country, and please go ahead and give us how this works, whether it works better, the challenges that you encounter. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Phil, for that introduction, and thank you so much for joining this side event, and I'm pleased to speak to you today about co-production and communication of early warning systems in Kenya. And just from our speakers, we've learned how co-production is very important in generation of information. And especially in this era of alternative facts, misinformation, and there's the urgent need to have evidence-based thinking and decision-making. So it's really critical to co-produce information, because then it improves the communication of the information, and also it catalyzes production of user-specific information. This afternoon, I'm going to speak about experiences from the Kenya Met Department, what we do, and how we communicate our climate services. And at Kenya Meteorological Department, we have like 2 layers of communication and production of climate information. So we do it at the national level, and we also do it at the county level. So at the national level, we have the National Climate Outlook Forums. This is where we engage different stakeholders to co-produce climate information. And because really in Kenya, climate information is very location and user specific. So we try to engage the different stakeholders in producing the climate information. And some of these stakeholders are from the water management resources, they're from the production and distribution of energy, from the agriculture and the food security sectors. So we engage them in these Outlook forums to discuss and produce the climate information. And the climate information, really, we do it mainly at like the production level and also at the communication level. So what we do during these climate outlook forums is we review the previous sessions, like previous seasons, like if the forecasts match the observed, whatever we predicted, we see if that can actually be matched with what is happening. And we mainly check on the onset, like was the timing correct? Is what we predicted agreeing with what was observed? We look at the distribution of rainfall, both in space and time, and see. So we're really trying to learn like what went wrong, how better can we improve our production of climate services or our forecasts. And we also identify impacts and implications of the forecast at that particular season, and we formulate responses. So we do this with our stakeholders. We sit with them and try to analyze to see, so what are the impacts that actually these sectors are likely to face? And then we sit down and agree and say, what are the strategies? We formulate strategies and say, how best can we navigate through the season? So if we expect below normal rainfalls, for example, what does that mean for agriculture sector? What does it mean for the water sector and on all the sectors? So it's a very, 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 very critical process in our dissemination and our production of climate information, in our provision of climate information. And then after that, we now scale down the information to the county level. So at the county level, we engage sort of like a participatory approach at the county level. So just for your information, in Kenya, we have 2 levels of government, two systems of governance. So we have the national government and the county government. But the provision of climate information still remains a national function. But Kenya Meteorological Department, understanding that it's really important for the information to go to the locals, they decided to establish county meteorological departments. So we have these offices at every counties where we engage with the users of information at that level, at the local level. And we've established, within these counties, we've established county weather and information centers where the county directors of meteorology engage with the users at that particular level. And at this level as well, we work with the local communities in co-producing the information as well. So we do communication and co-production at the same time. Apart from scaling down the forecast, we still engage at this level. We talk to indigenous communities, for example, and try to see if there are any complementarities or synergies with the science and the local knowledge, and try to improve our forecast. And at the community level as well, we have what we call community radio stations. So these are radio stations that disseminate climate information in the local language. So the county directors are likely to engage the community through these radio stations in through these radio stations in trying to disseminate the forecast. So we really try to take that forecast down to the people in the language that they understand and try to communicate to them what does that mean to them. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop that, but I'll take questions after this. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's appreciate Joyce for the good presentation and how they manage to scatter around the early warning to down to the grassroots. Thank you so much. Then along the value chain, again, you realize that media is very key. They play a very profound role in disseminating the information. And we have the BBC Media Action Kenya that have been working very closely with the producers. Mr. Njuguna David, could you kindly briefly give us some best and practical way that you deliver this information to end users? And if possible, some real practical experiences that you've encountered.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, sorry, good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
Thank you. You will understand why I need to hear feedback from you. It's because I come from a communications background, and feedback is important to us. All right? And I feel like I'm here to do a bit of summary from everyone, and I'm, again, at the end of that value chain. I want us to look at the photo on the screen, right? The photo on the screen. Look at the three ladies, right? Can you all see the three ladies on that screen? If you are to communicate with them, how would you communicate with them? What would your message look like? How would you package your message to reach these three ladies? Would you use social media? Would you use TV? Would you use radio? Chiefs, community influencers possibly? What would be the information needs of these three women? Do they need to know, how many degrees it will be, like our announcement? Sorry. How many degrees it's going to be? Would they need to know that really? Would they need to know how much rain they will experience, and if it's going to be hot, how hot it's going to be, right? They would need the practical weather forecast, right? That is where we come in as BBC Media Action. We work with journalists and scientists at the same time to try and bridge that gap, all right? The scientists and the researchers will provide the information, and you've had the presentations that they've done. They will provide the information, but the information most of the time is still technical, all right? And we, as the media, sometimes we find that you have so much on your desk, especially there are other stories to report about. There's politics, there's health, there's a lot that is going on the desk of any news reporter or any media, any media reporter. And once you receive a brief or a press release from the scientist that is very technical, what happens most of the time? You will put it aside. Why? Because it might take you more time to think about the stories that you'll get from that press release. So, as Media Action, what we have been doing is that we've been working with the scientists, and I'm glad I've come immediately after Kenya Meteorological Department, because we work with them as well. And our work is to help them, bring them both together, where you bring the scientist and the journalist, you bring them together, and you help them to work together to produce this information that serves the audiences. And I guess that is where the term co-production keeps coming up, right? It is where you're bringing two people to co-produce some information or some some shared information that will be beneficial for our audiences. And for us, that's a model that is really working well, because we find that sometimes scientists are not able to communicate their information in the simple terms that our audiences need. And our journalists have the platform and have access to our audience, but they are not technical experts. So journalists may find that yes, they have the platform and they have access to the audiences, but the information that they are receiving is too scientific. So once we bring them together, the media is able to understand how the scientists come up with the information, and the scientists are able to understand how can we communicate these technical terms better. And what happens is, at the end of the day, the end user, our three ladies, are able to get information that is actionable. And if we give them the information early enough, they are able to take action early enough. All right? And sometimes there are still some terminologies and some scientific terminologies that are still difficult to explain to our audiences, like the probabilities and chance. But over time, once the media and the scientists continue working together, then they will begin to share the same information with our target audience, and the target audience will be able to communicate. Our target audience will be able to take action early enough. So at the end of the day, for us as Media Action, we are more concerned about how do we enable our three young ladies to take action. Is it where to find water? Is it how to start a kitchen garden? And out of our interaction in the different projects that we've done with Down to Earth, with ICPAC, and with the Met Office, we have some success stories that I'd like to share with you. We have a lady, a farmer in Kwale, in the coastal region, who still listens to the indigenous knowledge, but still listens to the radio and compares the two and makes a decision. So out of the radio programs that we have been producing, that we have been mentoring journalists to produce, he is now able to compare and make a decision. And that makes him a more informed user, and he's able to take early action based on both sources of information. We have someone in Tanzania who decides when to go fishing or when to go into his boda, the motorcycle business. So he listens to the weather information, he hears how the day will be, and he decides which business he's going to take for that day. And then lastly, we have journalists who now are excited to produce stories, because in the beginning when we told them we have a down-to-earth project that is running for 2 years, they'll be like, for 2 years, I'll just be telling people about weather information. It's going to rain, it's going to be hot, and they feel like that is limiting. But over time, they realize that it's receiving information from the scientists, and then they are able to advise their audiences on how best to use this information. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I want to end by emphasizing what everyone has said. We cannot work individually. Journalists and media cannot work on their own because they have the platform and the access to the media. And scientists cannot work alone because they have the information. We have to work together. And once we work together, the three ladies who are going to fetch water will know where to get their water, how the weather will be, and that will be information that will help them take early action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Njuguna, and even the experiences that you've given from Tanzania and Kwale is really key. I think that brings us to the end of the discussion. Now we are getting to questions and answers, and I also want to ask viewers who are following online, if you have a question, please, you can use the Q&A utility to ask your question. Meanwhile, those who are lucky to be in the room, I would give opportunity for a few questions, and you point it directly to any of the panelists if you want it answered by a particular panelist. So you can give the microphones around so that we take a couple of questions, then we'll usher in the panelists to respond. So once again, thank you so much, the panelists, for that good presentation. Tell us your name.
Thank you. My name is Alpha. I'm coming from Guinea. And thank you to the panelists to share about this interesting and relevant subject, because I had an experience. I want to share it, and then I ask the question. It's going to be a little bit short. When I was in the USA, in Arizona particularly, I noticed that every single moment you receive a kind of pop-up in your messages saying warnings, this is going to happen near this place or near this side. If you are there, try to run this way or go this side. So it was overwhelmed to me. Every single minute I'm scared about an incident. Every single minute. If the storm starts, they will notify people from emails to messages, you see. So they're used to it. But as for African, we don't used to these kind of things. So at the beginning of the situation, the first week, I wanted to stop the pop-ups. I went to the security, I asked them, how should I stop this? How did you get my number and my emails to take me overwhelmed with information every single minute that this is going to happen? And just bad news. So I was feeling uncomfortable with this bad news. At least you have 10 messages a day, at least. And even it's farther than the place where you are notified. So I don't know. You want to create the same thing, maybe. Or your approach can be different. We are scientists, and then we are thinking about it. What do you think about our population in Africa? Much of them do not have phones. They don't even understand what Android is. And how do you think we can communicate and advertise before the events arrive to these people? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Let's take a couple of them, then we'll react to them. Your name, please, and your area of expertise, and be brief, please. Just go straight to the question.
Thank you very much. My name is Tahira Mohammed. I'm a PhD, nearly finishing my PhD in climate change, pastoralism and uncertainty. My question is about how to marry the concept of early warning and anticipatory action. For instance, in early warning, we always measure risk, where we know the probability of the outcome, but mostly in pastoral area where I did my research, pastoralists are facing uncertain event. They don't know the future outcome. Although the radios are giving risk in terms of what is coming, but the reality is they are facing an outcome. I give an example. When there was a locust outbreak in 2020, it took a lot of time for the development agencies to come and assess the need on the ground, while the locust invasion has already damaged the entire system. So we need to marry those two, how we act in terms of the anticipatory action, providing insurance and social protection, and what information we provide, because sometimes it is not risk we suffer from. There are some compounding uncertainties. Sometimes you're facing drought, but it is not drought which is affecting you. It is insecurity for you to access the pasture. So we need to know how different events intermarry to make people vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can take the two, then we move to the next questions. I will ask Richard to react to the first question.
Yeah, thanks, Alpha. That was, it's a really good point. I think the example that I gave in my presentation about the highway project, there are two responses from that. The first one is that you really need to be communicating with the users of the information about how they can receive the information. And that's really the key, is to understand what they can understand and how they would be able to receive that information. And so the examples that we had was that there were two different forms of communication. One was mobile phone, which was a text-based warning based on a color code, and the other one was simply physically flags on the beach, because that was what the users were telling us, that was how they could receive the information. So both of those were ways of being able to communicate effectively, in the sense of we understood that the users would be able to receive those. But the key to that, as I said in my presentation, was to do the co-production with the users to understand what information they needed and how they needed it to be communicated. So having a sort of a weather forecast system and a mobile phone system who decides we are going to pump out information like this, which is the example you're giving, is really isn't appropriate, and we have to do much more interaction with the users.
Thank you for that. I hope you are answered. I'll ask Benedicte also to contribute towards that, please.
Yeah, no, just to follow up on your question, because I think it's an essential question, but this is where the radio comes in, because for many of the recipients, they prefer the radio because the radio gives more time. We can spend more time explaining in such a manner that they do understand. But even when we're using radio communication, we have done a lot of work in advance to understand how to communicate with that specific group. So this is where, we have to spend so much time on understanding to whom are we communicating, and then also on the co-production that's been mentioned before. I know also there's been some very interesting example, for instance, from what Anticipatory has done in Senegal, where they've used the mobile to a great extent, but there they worked very closely with the farmers associations, the fisher association. So that's again, where you have this co-production and understanding that goes way beyond that what we are used to. So for a number of years, actually, the telephone, everybody's talking about the mobile telephones, etc., but still we must work a lot on the radio. Thank you.
Profound, that is really true. Majority of the people listen to radio here. Most people in Europe, telephone. So you have to know, but the key thing here is co-production. So thank you very much. I don't know whether Kenya Met is also doing something along that line. Probably Joyce could say something on that.
Thank you so much. I think that's a very valid question, and I could just add, on top of co-production, which is very key really when you want to engage the users of climate information, I think it's also important to take to the information. It should actually meet their needs. Of course, on top of co-producing and saying this, engaging the users to know what exactly they need, because you say there could be these very compounding factors or events or very interacting issues within the community. You talk to food insecurity, there's maybe conflict, especially in the pastoral communities. It's really important to engage with them and understand their very specific needs and even their circumstances at that particular time, to know what's happening in the community. And for the Kenya Met, the experience that I have is we even disseminate the information in barazas. These are small meetings that communities engage in, and it could be very it's within a very small demographic or a very, very small group, even like a village. So it's very particular for that region. So you get to engage with them, you get to understand what's happening in the region, you get to sort of really tailor the information for their needs. So I think it's very important. And of course, the use of mobile phones. I think uptake of mobile phones in Africa has been really, really high and very effective. And of course, on top, we use the vernacular languages that I talked about, like the local languages. So there are these community-based radio stations. It's an initiative of the Kenya Met Department to actually speak to the communities in their local languages so that they really understand and they can relate to the climate service that is being provided. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joyce. How do we marry concept of early warning and anticipatory action? Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you very much. I think we have very practical example to give. We are supporting a pilot in Kenya, Djibouti, and Uganda. Particularly, it is based on early warnings, but of course, setting thresholds and triggers. So that pilot is basically, with WFP, trying to pre-finance actions, predefined actions for different hazard scenarios. So I think that's the way to marry the two. Basically, as I said earlier, the missing link the broken link is between early warnings and early action. And we need to be invested in making sure that this is just one process of maybe two activities, the early warning part, but also need to be followed by the early action. So maybe those are very practical examples from the Horn of Africa. I hope that will answer the question.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Let's take a round of questions. Be brief, to the point, please.
Okay, my name is Tasfaye. I work for IGAD in the Drought Resilience Initiative. Mine is just a comment, just listening to a distinguished panelist who gave us really a lot of insightful information. What I missed is the government side. You see, because I come from the Intergovernmental Authority, I heard the perspective of science, with the exception of my brother from Media Action, who comes from, by and large, media. The rest of the perspective, with due respect, is a science perspective. So we need to hear about government and community-based views and perspectives as to why that anticipation, that response became difficult. And even why in the other similar side event we were talking about, scaling out of good practices. We need to hear perspectives and challenges of the governments and community-based organizations, and also the communities themselves to change. The issue is not about maybe listening to early warning and then having short or early maturing variety. It's not just that short and quick fix. The issue requires even from short to long term to building resilience. So I think we need to bring those different perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, next speaker. Next question, please.
Yes, Mark Harvey from Resurgence. I co-led the Daraja project, which involved, I think, at least 3 members of the panel. There was certainly input from ICPAC feeding into KMD, but it was also under the WISER program of the Met Office. And we were working in the urban space, in the informal settlements of Dar es Salaam and Nairobi. And I think I wanted to make 2 comments. One is that we have discussed and mentioned a lot, particularly in the latter half of this session, forecasts rather than early warnings. And what we felt was so important to the communities was that they got regular daily, weekly forecasts that actually helped make them, help them make decisions about whether they would wear a t-shirt that day or week, or think about and prepare for rain. And that actually getting early warnings into those regularly used channels, and we did ask them, where do you get your gossip from? Where do you get your sports news from? Trying to inhabit those channels was important. So a lot of this is about embedding the early warnings in regular forecasting products and services that are co-designed. My question is about feedback, and whether what we found was that there's a difference between feedback in terms of monitoring and evaluation and actually building a feedback mechanism into the service. And we did that through a WhatsApp group where we had about 60 organizations in each group in each city. And at times, the weather forecasters felt pressure because there'd be a message, the forecast is 4 hours late, what are you guys doing about it, right? And actually, that was built into the service. And it'd be interesting to have some reflections from the panel, perhaps from Joyce, on how helpful that is ultimately to have a feedback mechanism built into the service that perhaps does pressurize the forecasters a bit.
Your name, please.
Mark Harvey.
Thank you. Yes, a very pertinent question. Just be okay. You can come. Then we'll.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Romeo Sostene Nkurunziza. I'm a deployee. I I'm NORCAP deployed to support Ahmed in climate services. I was outside, then I met someone, I was presenting myself. Then the person told me, are you the above, below, rainfall average guy? So it's not a question, it's a challenge. This climate change is a global issue that needs the global togetherness to make sure that we face it. Our challenge, how can we produce information in a way we place it in our nursery schools, and our children, our babies will be able to understand it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question about evaluation, ICPAC is a regional body, works with Met services, and Met services are in touch with the end users directly. So there is that top, bottom, and then bottom up in terms of evaluation. So Joyce, could you kindly give us a brief on how you assess the products that are given to end users, please?
Thank you so much. I think those two questions I will try to address both, but of course, panelists can add to my comments. So the first one, Harvey, on feedback, it's really been useful engaging with communities and users directly, so that it's like a loop. So we give the information, and that is what actually co-production has really done. It has made sure that we are responding to their needs, and they're actually, so it's more of a user, so it's like we're meeting the requirements of the society, or it's more of like user needs. So it's more of a demand-driven exercise, which is very important. Because most of the time they would call and ask, you said actually it's gonna rain, it didn't rain, then it's a challenge to us. We take it very positively, we try to see what's happening. And also they say that, the way you say that, but this forecast is late, it's 4 hours late. So such kind of feedback has been very useful to us. We've always been taking these, and we discuss as a team how we can improve that. So yeah, so that's just like an experience, or like, experience of what has been happening. We receive these feedbacks, they're very important. It has helped us a lot in improving the provision of climate information. On talking about communicating probabilities, the above normal, below normal, we've really done a lot of work in this. I understand the question, and I understand where you come from with that question, and we've received these comments and questions a number of times from the users. But so what we've tried to do to address this problem is, when we work with the users, we try to say, during this co-production phase, or the communication phase, we say, what does below normal and above normal mean to a sector? For example, for energy production, we will talk of the hydropower dams. What does it mean? So below normal means what? It means the water flows are going down, or above normal means they're gonna receive sort of above normal water flows in the rivers or the dams. So we've taken it down, we've translated that to like the exact service. What exactly does it mean for that provision of that particular service? So we can talk, for example, with farmers about what does below normal mean. So we try to break down and try to understand. Below normal is a certain region, means it's below 50 millimeters, for example, or 100 millimeters, and what does that mean for crops, for pasture, and we've improved in actually explaining those probabilities with the users. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our time is gone, but I want to give 2 quick questions as we wrap up. Then Richard will handle again the issue of school. Okay. So just a quick one, be brief, please.
Thank you. My name is Alphonse Molo, and I'm a PhD fellow at the University of Nairobi and University of Copenhagen, and keen on issues of climate information. So quick one, there is we've talked of co-production and co-ownership, but when you look at the concerning pastoralism, there is again the issue of co-dissemination, where for pastoralists, greetings go beyond 10 minutes, and it's again discussing weather forecast and weather scenarios and where it rained and how it rained. So that's one thing. The issue now called dissemination, then how do you pin that on their lived environment? And the second thing, how observation was right. When it comes to the issue of the climate, again, packaging the information. The traditional way has a way in which you include the issue where possible conflict areas and action where elders are sent to negotiate access to pasture, where pasture is available, and the other bit of where there's likely insecurity incidences. So all that is usually packaged for them. And most papers, when it comes to climate information, there's the focus on farmers, and even among agro-pastoral communities, the information is mainly geared towards, it's flowed towards agricultural farmers and not pastoralists. So the question is, then how do we rope in pastoralists in this conversation? So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think last one. Okay. Quick
Hi,
one, please. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Tushar Wali. I work with CBM Global. I have a comment and not a question, unfortunately. We talked about risk communication and dissemination and how it reaches the last mile. And I wanted to emphasize that 1 out of every 6 person has some form of disability. And it's important that these channels are inclusive from the beginning. So people with varied needs are included in getting that message. And this is directly linked to the action they can take in order to safeguard the gains they've made over years. So it's something to consider for all of us as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I would quickly ask Richard to comment on the education bit. And then Dr. Ahmed, you will handle the issue of co-dissemination and packaging of information.
So thank you very much about that, the challenge in terms of getting information out to essentially everybody, which is what we need to do. This is something that I think everybody who's involved now takes very, very seriously. So I'll give a couple of examples. The first one is within IPCC. The Working Group 1, just a week last Friday, issued what it called a summary for all, which is a very, very plain language summary of the major findings of the AR6, which is actually meant for everybody. It is something that could be used communication in schools, communication to policymakers, across the board, essentially. But the other thing is I am very, very aware that in an enormous number of the funding opportunities that are now becoming available, that outreach, the development of educational materials, getting the information out is now a core part of a lot of projects and programs. And so I think there is a really big push, a really big understanding that that is absolutely essential, and a really big push for that to happen. And I just also want to make a very quick response to that very last comment that we had. The new funding program from the FCDO in the UK, the CLARE program, has intersectionality running right the way through it. And so the idea is that every member of the community with their relevant vulnerabilities has to be a key focus of any project within that program. And that is something that also is being very, very well understood, reflected to an extent in the Working Group 2 report, but understood to be a very, very important new dimension that we need to be taking into account.
Thank you very much. I think our time is gone. There's a next session coming in for this room. But we have to understand the issue of packaging of information, and I think Kenya Met, you do a lot of packaging information, particularly to pastoralist communities. Probably you could just give some comments on how you do this. Then Dr. Ahmed will give the ICPAC perspective.
You mean packaging information for the pastorals? Okay. I think what we really do with the pastoral communities, because their needs. Today in my presentation, I talked about a move towards provision of climate services that are very sector-specific and location-specific. So for us, for pastoralists, we try to understand what are their particular needs, and for them would be availability of pasture and mainly service water or lots of water for their animals. And then because these are really key driver for sort of like the conflicts that we see in this region, because there's a lot of issues around communities trying to move around in search of pasture, especially at this time when we have drought. So we try to produce information where we go beyond just explaining what the forecast is, but try to make them understand what are the implications of these forecasts. So if you understand the implication and the impact of these forecasts to their activities, then you can try to formulate a strategy where they can actually cope with this. And that is what we try to do with these communities. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I think you've helped Ahmed. Or you want something to add?
Very quickly, Philip, on the governance side, I think that's very, very critical. I think fundamentally early action is issue of governance, colleagues. Look at Sendai, Paris. The national governments are the prime responsible for action. So when we talk of early action, it basically is touching on the national governments. They should be the one taking the primary responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have come to the end of this very, very fruitful discussion. I want to request that we have some small assignment here for you. If you are kind enough, we have a barcode that you will simply scan, and then please give us feedback on the 4 questions that are there. Kindly, it will really be useful for us as we wrap up this session. So I want to take the opportunity once again to thank the panelists. Can we give a round of applause to the panelists? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have really learned a lot during this 1.5 hour session. And I believe we have taken something home that we're also going to disseminate or give to our people who are affected by climate. I want to also thank the organizers of this event. They are here in the room. We have Anna Ama, who was very kind enough to help us. Let's appreciate Ama. We also have Abebe Tadege of ICPAC. Abebe, just show us where you are. Then Catherine, who also was very useful in this. I'm sure she's following online on this. So wherever you're following, Catherine, thank you so much. And I want to also thank you participants for being patient 1.5 hours following the discussion. Thank you very much. You can also clap for me for moderating this well. Thank you. This is the end of the session.